Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find the solution? Where's that nudge come from to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? This podcast is designed to help you find your catalyst, take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Sale Game Plan. It's our approach to goal setting and execution. If you head to catalystsale.com/game, you can find more information. My catalyst today is Cliff Simon. Cliff is the VP of Sales and Revenue at the Carabiner Group, and he's a leader in the RevOps space. Cliff, it is good to see you. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for jumping in on this conversation. I would expect we're going to get pretty deep into RevOps, and I think there's a lot of confusion out in the marketplace around RevOps. And I know I tend to use this quote or overuse this quote from The Princess Bride, but it's when they're saying inconceivable, and it says, well, I think you keep using that word, but I don't think you know what it means. And it can mean so many different things. So if you are interested in RevOps, this is the episode for you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Mike. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. What's RevOps?
I think to your point, it means so many things to so many people. But the way we think about RevOps and the way I hope the industry starts thinking about RevOps is, what is the throughput of a dollar? When you're putting that into your business, what happens to that dollar and how does it come out onto the other side, right? All the processes, the systems, the architecture of running a recurring revenue business. What happens? And the management and tracking of all of that, right?
So when you think of throughput, what does that mean to you? Like, so someone might be saying, okay, all right, so I heard throughput and I heard $1 and I heard it goes
into this black box of a Series A, Series B, Series C company. It comes out on the other side so that the VCs get their cash. What does that actually look like? It looks like creating processes for a go-to-market perspective, creating systems, creating enablement, creating analytics around all of that, and truly being that tide that rises all ships. I think what a lot of people conflate RevOps for is sales operations, or it's just marketing operations and sales ops together. No, it's really, how do I take all of my metrics and understand the business across every function, bring that into one group so that they can operationalize, create efficiencies, help steer the business in a way that might be better for the business, but not necessarily better for sales or better for marketing, right? There's always that tug of war, or for CS or product. How can you make sure that you're always moving the needle forward in a way that is going to help get you there, as opposed to just fighting over the fact that I want the extra 10 hours of that admin person to do the things that are on my plate?
Yeah. And one of the things I'm seeing out in the market, it seems like, is people are looking at some of these roles as lower level or entry level roles, or they're trying to bring in entry level folks into an organization to do it. What you've just described is not entry level.
Mm-hmm. It's not. And I think that comes with the territory. RevOps at its core is an executive function, right? You have to be able to think about your business strategically from the top. And there needs to be a clear understanding of that in the C-suite. If it's not coming from there, it's coming from the ground up. And are you getting what you actually need in that case? How many times is it some SDR that didn't want to go and become an AE because he didn't want a number over his head, and he happened to be good at pulling reports, and that's how he was hitting his number. And now all of a sudden, that's your RevOps analyst or specialist. And they've got no one giving them executive oversight on like how to actually grow in the function or to do it properly.
Yeah. And the danger there is now when they're involved in those meetings, they get pulled in different directions. So rather than leading in the discussion, which is what we're talking about, they end up reacting to a lot of the stuff that's around. And depending on who they roll up to, there may be a power struggle. And then all of a sudden you lose access to the insight that you're hoping to gain of understanding the throughput of $1 inside the business. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And then the other part of that too is that person may be very limited in their professional experience, right? So now you've got someone who's maybe got the keys to the castle or They've got the skeleton key to get into a bunch of places, and they don't necessarily understand the responsibility or the power with which to wield that. They don't understand the complexity of the data they're looking at. They can't help you look at the nuance of it because they just don't know. And that's not their fault, right? They stumbled into this. When I say that RevOps is an executive function, it's a lot like culture, right? If you're not actively pursuing it, developing it, and being intentional about it, it's just going to happen on its own in some way, shape, or form. And it's going to just be this amalgamation of reports and fields, and you're running blind. And when you go to get that next round, or when you're doing your due diligence, someone's going to look under the hood and go, what the hell is this? Oh, you thought you were getting 10x on your dollar? Maybe you're going to get 4.
Let's talk about a bit about how we've gotten here. So what the evolution looked like. So you had said sales ops before, and you also said marketing ops. And there's a bunch of these operational functions inside the revenue teams, broader revenue teams, or inside organizations that have kind of worked inside individual silos. Let's go back a couple of years and talk about where we were, and then kind of how we've gotten to where we are. And then let's move into a what's next discussion. So where were we, let's say, 5 years ago?
Shoot, 5 years ago, RevOps, I don't think even existed as a hashtag on LinkedIn, right? And
well, then it wasn't happening, I guess. If it didn't exist as a hashtag. So 5 years ago, what did the world look like when it comes to this kind of stuff?
I think a lot of these pieces have existed, just they didn't exist in tech the way that they do now. Right? You have large organizations, large publicly traded companies that have always tried to bring together operational efficiency. And I think what we saw was a lot of people that were interested in making the money that you could in tech come over, bring that operational expertise, and say, wait, there's a better way of doing this. There should be an operating cadence where these different departments meet together on a regular basis and communicate effectively with one another. And how do you continue to drive that efficiency and drive that relationship? You don't have them reporting to other people. You bring them all together and have them be one unit. And now you've got them being one unit. They're singing from the same hymn sheet. Everyone knows what their marching orders are. And you can act as that Switzerland group, right, within an org, and start actually taking care of both the tactical and the strategic items that are of actual consequence, instead of just what someone's whim and fancy are from department to department. Right? And the other problem when you're siloed like that is that you're so heavily dependent upon the capabilities of that VP or that C-level person in that silo. Right? If they're not strong in that area, good luck.
Yeah. It seems I was fortunate enough to work for ed tech company where sales reported into the COO back in 2000, early 2000s. And I think with that level of structure, and it's actually mid 2000s, I guess now, but with that level of structure, there was this operational excellence or operational component, operational set of thinking, system thinking that was applied inside the organization. And then you move into another organization. It was a part of the leader at that time was former military. So again, very operationally oriented. You'll find some leaders who will be operationally oriented and they'll work and they'll set up these systems. Then you'll find others who maybe just have kind of made it up as they go along, and they think of sales as more art than anything else. And I think the danger in those instances, if you're trying to figure out which one you have, the one on the art side tries to hire a lot of people who sell like them and want to keep going that manner. And that's not scalable inside an organization. It might support early execution, but it's not going to be scalable. You're not going to be able to get the data and you're not going to learn quickly. On the other side, it's going to be more people who are looking at things from a process perspective, a systems perspective, a design perspective, where they're starting to look at operational effectiveness. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's funny because I had sort of a similar background, right? I was at a fintech for like 2.5 years, and we reported to the COO, very operationally driven. I've tried to hire for both. So I've got the very artsy salesperson. And I think sales is an art, right? There's an art to being able to manipulate and wield language in a way to win someone over and to convey value and to earn trust, right? Those are artistic, right? You can break them down into a scientific method and try to increase your P-win, right? And figure out, all right, if I can do this in as little meetings as possible, I have the least amount of chance of screwing up. How can I make this as efficient as possible? But you still need to execute. And to me, the execution's the art. But you need to have processes and systems to operate, because otherwise what happens is you get that charismatic salesperson that comes in the door. They don't document anything. You have no metrics for the last 18 months. They leveraged every relationship that they had, made you a ton of money, and then they go off and rinse and repeat and do it somewhere else. And now you're left holding the bag like, oh, I'm a $5 million ARR company. Let's scale this thing. With no processes, no systems, no roadmap of what success looks like. As KD says, there's no wiggle, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what good looks like.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you go through and you think about the founders who work to transition, from founder-led sales into more of like a founder augmented or founder amplified. And many of them haven't documented the process. They just go out there and do, and they really lean into the art of, hey, we're solving some really interesting problems out there in the marketplace, and people want to get on board with that on that journey. They want to get on board because they believe and they're excited about being part of something new and something that's innovative. The challenge happens when you try to replicate that. So this is where again, more of the systems approach, operationally thinking, can start to get yourself into a position where you can add components to the machine. So let's talk about kind of where we are. So we talked about where we were, which is, hey, we've got this thing existed in a couple of different places. People didn't really know where to go and get information. And ultimately, sales was probably called, or revenue teams were probably looked at as a black box. There's this disconnect between sales and marketing inside organizations. And now, back then it might have been sales, marketing, and account management. Account management probably rolled under the sales group. And today we like to call customer success and all of these other things. But we've got these roles inside the organization that are operating inside silos. Fast forward to, let's say, the last 12 months. What's the evolution that's happening in this last 12 to 18 months and going on right now that's giving folks like you and me optimism about where we are now and where we're potentially going to go? And then we'll get into where we're going.
It's interesting, right? Because you've got 3 years ago, it was very much like, what the hell is RevOps? 2 years ago, it was, why do I need this? And this year, it's very much been, oh my God, everyone else is doing this. How do I do it? Right? And it's this perception that they must have it. And it's not just coming from within the organization. They're starting to feel that from the investors. We want to see better data. We want to be able to start comparing Portco to Portco, apples to apples, and really understand where we're making our bets and how can we maximize the potential return. And I think all that's been conflated against a very difficult hiring market, right? There's not enough people who know how to go out and do the operational piece of it. We've seen a wild swing. I mean, markets correct really quickly, right? We've seen a wild swing on the sales side. I think in the top 10 cities in North America for venture-backed cap companies, they had like 45,000 more open sales jobs than people back in January. And it's flipped 60,000 in the opposite direction. There's now like 12,000 more salespeople than there are roles.
Wow.
RevOps, that's not the case. There's like 5,600 people with RevOps titles of varying levels of seniority on LinkedIn back in January with 20,000 open RevOps roles. When we looked at that same data in May, it was 11,000 people in RevOps roles and 35,000 open recs. And I think what we're going to see, I know this to be true because this has happened historically every single time that there is a recession, is that you have to get tighter. You have to stretch your dollar further. That's why your investors are telling you, shore things up, get leaner. You need to extend your runway 24, 30 months, right? In order to do that, you're going to have good operations at the core of it. Because if you don't, you might not make it through. Or you're going to have to make some really tough choices around how you staff and how you operate a business. And we're seeing that right now. I think I saw an article just earlier this week. It's been 70,000 layoffs in venture-backed SaaS just in the last few weeks. That's a staggering number considering this was one of the hottest employee markets I can remember.
Yeah, just a couple months ago, right? It was so hot. I mean, there were SDRs getting six-figure OTEs, whether those OTEs were real or not, to be determined. But there was definitely a cash grab, and we were running very loose.
Those $70,000 base salaries for SDRs were real.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah, so that's salary that people were getting in these roles where 8 months ago, 10 months ago, and this is kind of dating the podcast here, but we're recording here in June of 2022, where mid 2021, you're hiring those roles at anywhere between 35 and 40K from a base perspective, and they might get another bump to 15 or 20K depending on from a performance. So very, 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 very big shift. Is there the danger right now that the same thing happens on the RevOps side, where because of a supply and demand challenge, you start seeing organizations overhire people who thought it was cool to stick RevOps in their LinkedIn profile or in their job experience, and now they're going to get inside an organization, and ultimately they don't really have the business acumen, or they don't understand how each of these pieces kind of connect to each other. These gears across the organization start connecting. Is that a danger right now?
Yeah. I mean, plain and simple, right? We saw people getting director level roles that had 3 to 5 years of experience, getting 180 to 200K OT. That never used to happen. You'd get someone with 7 to 10 years of experience for 150, right? So there's a lot of people who have taken on director and VP titles in RevOps that don't have the experience, and either they're going to get found out or they're going to learn really quickly. And those companies who hired in knowing that and betting on the talent to be able to rise to the top and to adapt are going to be really happy because they've got someone who can do the work. But yeah, I fear that there will be a good chunk of the market that's going to realize that maybe they didn't actually buy what they thought they did.
So let's talk a bit about what's changed from a technology perspective, because the tech stack continues to shift too, which starts to give you either, well, there are pros and cons, I guess. You can get access to a lot of data, but sometimes we might not know what to actually do with the data, or the data isn't able to connect together where we're able to capture insight. So what about the technology? Are there things that you're excited about that have happened in, let's say, the last 6 months? Or let's say 6 to 12 months from a technology perspective, where it starts to feel like we're getting better at enabling these roles through some of the technology that's available.
There's been some really cool tech that's rolled out recently, specific in the RevOps space, where you can now manipulate data in ways that you couldn't before. I think there's a lot of limitations with what the average person can do with something like Salesforce. It's a great tool, but damn, that thing's 20 years old and it isn't pretty. That UX UI is not great. But
come on, they updated Lightning and they put the cool little Einstein guy with the different stuffed animal stuff, and didn't that change things? Lightning changed everything, right?
Listen, they just do a really, really good job of buying and not building it, right? They're a machine, but the machine isn't always the friendliest to work with. And getting these tools, there's things like Syncurity and the like, where you can pull in the data, manipulate the data outside of the system, and push it back into the system in a way that makes sense. I think that's a good play. Salesforce is so bad from a UX UI perspective. There's an entire ecosystem of companies that exist just to replace that functionality. That's crazy.
It really is crazy. I think if you ask people inside your organization, does the tool make it easier for them to do their job? Yes or no? And really listen to the answer. You probably are going to be surprised by the answer. Now, there's going to be somebody on the enablement side that will say, yes, it does, because we need to get all of these other fields, but then nobody actually does anything with the fields. Or worse, and I've seen this happen inside organizations multiple times, you create such a high threshold for being able to enter an opportunity or put information in the system. So people just start clicking buttons and checking boxes. And now you've just got crap data inside your systems. So like and then think about how important this discussion is around data and throughput and systems. And now you've got crap data. Who's going to go in and clean up all the crap data? And okay, now your director of RevOps or whatever now becomes the data cleaner inside the organization, which is not that's not a strategic role. That's a waste of time.
Boy. They're not there to be the pool boy.
Yeah.
They're not there to skim all the crap off the top and pull it out. And it's, you're right. It's poorly thought of UX, UI. It's bad training. And Salesforce was not designed for the seller. Salesforce is designed for the C-suite. And so I can grab my data and pull it out, put it into my PowerPoint presentations and bring it to the board. That's what Salesforce is for. Now, if you take a proactive approach to it and you start not just having those real conversations with the frontline folks, but actually listening to them and learning about what are the things they actually need, and now mirroring that up against what should our go-to-market process look like, you can construct it in a way that allows for a linear progression most times and creates the UX UI in such a way that it's simple for them to say, okay, these are the 3 or 4 things I need in this particular stage of pipe, right? Break it down for them, make it easy, and then take that data and surface it up so they can understand, well, these are the accounts I should be focusing my time on because this is where I typically win. This is how I can increase my paycheck. This is how I can increase my conversion rate from one stage to the next. This is how I can increase my close rate. And teach them.
What you're describing sounds a lot like what organizations are trying to do with their customers when implementing their solution into an organization based on an understanding of problems. How come we don't shift the lens and look at our internal customers to figure this stuff out?
Because we expect them to just get it done. We forget that the people working for us sometimes are people, right? We do the things we do from a CS, an implementation, an onboarding perspective, because we understand that they're people. And we understand that if they have a good experience using our product in the first 30, 60, 90 days, the chance of them churning diminishes greatly. The chances for them to increase and cross-sell and upsell increase dramatically, right? Because we want to drive that time to value, that NPS score, that CSAT. But you're right. How many times do we not do that internally? How often are you asking your team as a leader, what about our technology stack isn't working for you? Or how could we implement this in a way that's going to allow you to do your job more effectively? Right? I don't want to spend 3 hours of my week. Well, maybe that's light for most salespeople. Right? I don't want to spend 3 hours of my week updating Salesforce. I don't want to spend an hour prepping before I have a one-on-one with my boss to make sure that my pipeline is tight so that he can go and ask me 1,001 questions about every op that's in there. No, I have access to Salesforce. My team has access to Salesforce. I go through Salesforce, I look at it at a time, and then we can talk about the ones that actually matter, and we can do coaching and help them actually skill up, right? So it's a two-sided thing, right? You have to enable your people to do well, but you also have to not be that leader who's just going to say, what about this deal and this deal and this deal? Like, actually talk to them. Just treat people like people. Damn, it's not that hard.
It's not that hard. Literally treat people like people. I think we get into this trap of we're working so fast. We're doing all of these things. We're so in front of the trees that we forget to step back. I know when you and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Extreme Ownership book, Jocko Willink, and how important it is to detach as a leader, step back and look at the overall playing field. And if you don't have people inside your organization that can do that, then you've got to do it. Or you've got to go out there and find the people who can do it. But it can't be these things, the risk, I think, with a lot of this stuff. And we've seen the evolution happen in the past. Like we've seen this movie before where someone comes up with a new title of something. And then everybody says, hey, I need that because I bought into the marketing. I bought into the pomp and circumstance. I bought into all this stuff. And now we've got, everybody is going to do this. Like, we're going to be growth hackers and we're going to be We're going to build out sales enablement inside our organization. We're going to build out revenue enablement. We're going to do RevOps. And we're going to do all of these things. And ultimately, we find ourselves chasing shiny stuff rather than actually getting real work done, or getting back to what's the specific problem that we're looking to solve. So let's talk about the future. Let's shift into what's next inside this area. And when you talk about the leadership aspect of RevOps, let's start first with where does it fit inside an organization? Who should RevOps roll up to inside an organization?
This is a good one.
Or in a high performing organization, where should this capability roll up to?
So I really appreciate you asking that question. I think that we've seen it be really successful in a couple different ways, right? Traditional CRO, COO. I've always found the CFO play to be fairly intriguing because finance is maybe the closest thing that you had prior to that neutral party that was looking out for the business's interest.
Yeah.
What I think we're going to start seeing more and more of, and maybe it's because we did it first, is I think you're going to have a chief revenue operations officer that's going to have that seat at the table, that's going to truly be shoulder to shoulder with all the other folks in the C-suite. That way, this is an executive function. It is something that's coming down from the top, and you're getting that alignment from day one.
I hope so. I'm optimistic about it as well. In the spirit of, we've seen this movie before and have it played out. One of the challenges historically that's happened in an industry like EdTech or enablement tech is HR professionals talking about wanting to have a seat at the table. And then you started to get into things like a chief CHRO type role, and you get into chief people officer roles, and these things get layered with a new label or new brush. I believe that the same thing is going to happen here, where there's going to be this view of we need a seat at the table. And the challenge is, if you've hired too low inside your organization, or you've not brought in the right advisors to help you build that properly, you're going to bring a person in, give them the seat at the table. They're not going to be prepared to have that seat at the table. And then you're going to start to question, why the heck are they at the seat at the table? And then they turn into the note taker inside the business, which absolutely sucks. So if you are a leader listening to this and saying, hey, how do I integrate RevOps into my organization? And you think that this is a non-executive function, you think that it is a flavor that you just plug in and a capability that's going to help build the business, and you think that by getting them involved in just leadership discussions, they're automatically going to be integrated, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, the people listening can't see this, but I'm like violently nodding. Like,
okay, so let's talk about speed to impact. So inside organizations. And this is where I think mercenaries can play a really good role. And when I say mercenaries, I think those people who have an expertise that you can bring on. And this is a bit self-serving. Both Cliff and I are folks who work with organizations as advisors or fractional leaders inside organizations in different capacity and capability there. But how can an organization start thinking about bringing on a capability, partnering with someone so that they can start to accelerate expertise and then build the capability inside the organization? That's what you're doing?
It is. I think the unique challenge with RevOps compared to almost anything else within the companies that we work with is that you just can't throw $1 million at it and have it fixed-ish in 90 days, right? It's too involved of a function. It's too difficult to build. I mean, you can throw money at it and start building things really, really, really quickly, right? There are plenty of people who will do the work, but you never know what you're going to get. And is that output going to be something that's actually designed to work for the company for the long term? Because I think what happens a lot of times is folks will bring someone in, they're looking for that quick time to value because I need X. And then they never think about change management. They don't think about user adoption. They don't think about how this is going to affect my business 12 months or a year from now, or 18 months, 2 years, whatever it might be. And they don't think about the fact that if I build this wrong now, it's going to be 4 to 5 times as hard to do it later, because we're going to be 4 to 5 times the headcount when I need to make that change.
You mean organizations think that they can just bolt this on in kind of like a Frankenstein type thing and say it's going to work?
I mean, Rosalind calls it a Frankenstack all the time, right? And it's happened so often. You just get this piece and tag this on, and marketing wants this, and CS wants that, and product needs this. Like, well, shit, how's this all? I don't know if you this on the podcast, but who even knows if it's going to work together? Like, what's the data flow? What's the process? How do the APIs work? Is there even a native integration? Is it bidirectional? Think about how these systems are going to interact with one another before you jump in and say, yeah, I'm signing another $500,000 worth of line item expense.
And to the point that you made there, and I think this is an important one to reinforce, it's more than just sticking technology into the stack, and it's more than just drawing out what it looks like and where that technology fits. I mean, you highlighted there's a change management component. There's a transformation that needs to happen inside the organization. Whenever you start talking about change management and transformation, now you're dealing with humans who have a lot of other human stuff to do. And I don't know that a lot of people really understand or put enough behind how important change management inside an organization is. You've seen it in the companies that you work with, meaning if you've implemented some technology inside an organization, you probably have seen the death spike of implementation, which is you roll it out, everybody uses it, and then everybody goes back to doing the work that they did before. That same stuff will happen inside your organization if you do this incorrectly.
100%. It's sad, but no one seems to remember that we're people, and processes are necessary, and technology is a great amplifier. But if you don't create technology and train people on how to use it, like don't create technology in such a way that people can use it and then enable them to do so, it doesn't matter. Like we talk about it internally all the time. We can build the best tech that you want to have, but if no one's using it, does it matter?
So Cliff, we've gotten pretty deep into the whole discussion. This is a complex situation. We're not only dealing with organizations, what's happening inside the business, we're dealing with teams inside the organization, what's happening inside segments of the business, and we're dealing with people inside the business, the people that interact inside each of those teams. We're also talking about process stuff that ideally helps us operate as a business effectively, our operating system. And we talked about technology that can be used to enable folks, which means, wow, this is a lot of stuff. Let's get into how to just start to think about, is my business ready to start working on this capability? Not in a way that it gets bolt on and it's Frankenstacked onto things that then it needs to be ripped and replaced when the next leader comes into the business, but more functionally so that they can start to build a solid foundation. What are some of the first things that we should start looking at to build that solid foundation to determine, hey, am I ready to actually start? Is now the time to start thinking about it? If it is the time to start thinking about it, how do I put together a time horizon on it? Let's get back to the foundational kind of questions that we should be looking at to say, am I ready? Is this the thing I should start doing?
I think, like everything else, it has to start at the top, plain and simple. I said before that RevOps is an executive function. Well, you need your executives to be thinking about this function, right? Go take a course, read a couple books, change the way your mind is thinking about this. It is not an expense. It is an investment that you're making in your business, right? So often I see executives look at RevOps as a line item of like, this is a money suck. No, this is the thing that if you invest in it well, will be one of the greatest contributing factors to the success of your business and its ability to scale. The only difference between a scrappy startup and a company that's going for that B round because they're actually scaling well and they're doing it with incredible velocity, right? That growth rate's actually increasing, not just 3x, 3x, 2x, 2x, but actually increasing, is a great operational core. You got to take care of your body, right? If you work on the core, everything else seems to usually be okay, right? Same thing. Take care of this because it's at the core of your business. I would read Great Mental Models by Farnham Street, The Model Thinker by Scott Page. Winning by Design's got a great YouTube channel that talks about recurring revenue businesses and how to start thinking about that. If you're a member of Pavilion, which I know we both are, there's some great intro to RevOps courses there that Rosalind has helped curate. and start thinking about these things well and have conversations with your executive team about how can we actually make this something that works for us inside the business. And you have to get the executive team bought into, right? Because they're all going to have their wants and desires. And at some point they have to start shedding themselves and putting on what's best for the business. And I think that's a learned skill. It's a level of maturity that needs to occur. And hopefully your teams are there and willing to work with you in that manner. That's where I'd start. It's got to start at the top. And then you can start trickling down, building up and looking at skills, competencies, and what you actually need to hire for based off of what may be lacking within the organization. How can you nurture that internally? Or do I need to go outside of the organization and bring in somebody as a full-time hire? Or do I want to bring somebody in from the outside to do an assessment of where we are now so that we can understand where we are from a benchmarking perspective and figure out where our strengths and gaps are, where are our areas of high value impact that might not be a high effort, right? Sort of put that quadrant together and start making steps towards addressing those items.
Really good place to start. And you started with, let's ask some questions. Start asking some questions so that we can learn as we go through it. And those questions will help shift perspective and help us overcome blind spots. You can find a number of people out there who will be happy to chat with you about the models, and we'll get into how to connect with Cliff at the Carabiner Group in the work that they do. Next, I would start with the question. And when you start asking the question, then you can start to figure out where are the sources to start to solve for that. There are other leaders out there in the marketplace who might just be a step or two ahead of you. They'll be able to share some experience around what they would have done differently. Learn from them. Don't think that you can just do this inside in your own vacuum if you're just starting on your own. I mean, think about the mistakes that you make when you just start on your own. So there's a really good community of folks. Cliff mentioned a number of those, and we'll include links in the show notes. So Cliff, where can people find out more about what you're working on? Where would you like people to connect with you directly?
Sure. Yeah. LinkedIn's great. Cliff Simon. If you want to connect via email, I'm cliff@carabinergroup.com. Those are probably the two easiest places to find me. Well, I did have one last thought about that's just like the practical application. I think a really simple way to start with the executives and one step below them from a management perspective, start building out the operating cadence, right? Meet bi-weekly for an hour with the different department heads or the different lieutenants in those departments and share what's going on, share the feedback, right? CS has so much knowledge that they need to share with product, that they need to share with marketing, that they need to share with sales, and back and forth of all the way through that chain, right? Learn from each other. That's how this starts when you're really small and no one's giving you the function. So take some ownership. Take some ownership
and pay attention to those feedback loops, right? Like there are so many opportunities for us to learn inside the organization. If you know of someone who would benefit from this conversation, would enjoy listening to the conversation, please share it with them. Let Cliff and I know via LinkedIn. We like to see those shares and we'll engage on those. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?